of a funeral ceremony building at burial ground with associated landscaping and parking at Farnham Park Cemetery, land at Hale Road, Farnham. For anyone new today or watching on the live stream, my name is Gareth Wildgoose and I am a Chartered Town Planner and Planning Inspector appointed by the Secretary of State to hold this inquiry. This is day 3 of the inquiry, but firstly, the usual reminders. If anyone's got a mobile phone or other electronic device, just if you can turn any notifications to silent, please, just to avoid any interruptions. I'll give everyone a few moments. Okay, and then just in terms of the day today, we usually aim to break for lunch at around about 1 p.m. with suitable breaks at the appropriate times in the mid-morning and the mid-afternoon. It doesn't seem like we've got a representative of the council here immediately regarding the evacuation procedures, so I will run through them because I do recall them. I'm not aware that we've got a fire drill today. We did have one on Tuesday, and I was told that's the appropriate time. The fire exits are located at each side of the room. Just follow the lit signs, and the assembly point is in the car park at the front of the building. And if anyone needs assistance, there should be someone from the council available for disabled access in the event of a fire, because the lifts won't be available. I think I've covered everything there as far as I know. Yes, I do remember these things and I do listen. So and it does come in handy at times when someone's not available. So that's okay. Just in terms of yesterday, we ran through the second session of interested party statements. Then we heard from the council's witness, and we had the presentation of evidence, the full cross-examination and the re-examination, together with some inspector questions. Today the programme it was slightly behind the published programme because it was getting a little too late in the day to start with the appellant's first witness. So the intention is to start with the appellant's first witness this morning. With a fair wind, we may get through all 3 witnesses that were programmed for week 1 on this day today. But if not, there was always flexibility in the programme for the third of the witnesses, which will be the landscape witness, to move into week 2. We'll see where we are as we move through the day on those matters. My hope is that we still get there, but obviously need to express that precaution now for anyone who might be here for specifically for the landscape witness if we don't get through to the landscape. Okay. Before we start, are there any interested parties who wish to speak in previous sessions who only attended today and haven't had the opportunity to speak? I just have to check now. No, that's fine. Thank you. Okay, well, with all that said, I don't believe there was any other housekeeping matters. That I didn't have any emails from the parties received overnight, so I think we're still up to inquiry document 7. So, and I don't have any pending requests either at this particular point, Mr. Banner.
So the one thing we're waiting on a little bit of printing, which is still being done. I think we can probably live without it for now. Mr. McLaughlin is going to, excuse me, forgive me. Mr. McLaughlin has prepared a presentation that he's going to read rather than me asking questions, which is consistent with his evidence, not sort of new evidence. We thought, to save your pen, we'd offer you the opportunity to have the text, and Mr. Green too. We're not offering it forward as a new evidence as such, but rather than to save your pen. Mr. Jivraj as well, in light of some of the comments yesterday, would like to say a few remarks about the Ismaili culture, which provides some context for the questions I'm going to ask in terms of, are things essential, are they not essential? Again, that's a text which he's going to deliver. Again, to save your pen, it's about 5 minutes, I've seen it, but to save your pen, we offer you the opportunity to have the text. We don't require you to have it, it's up to you. He's entitled to say the words, and it's a question really whether you'd like to have the transcript.
I'm happy to take the transcript as long as Mr. Green has a copy and we're willing to accept it as well.
So yes, I've made clear I'm perfectly content with that approach, so long as it's not introducing significant new evidence.
Yes, that's the point. That's the
Yes,
essential point,
yes.
really. I will accept them as inquiry documents.
Thank you, sir. So it's just, I think that the printers are still doing their thing.
Well, in that case, we'll just pause for a minute or two, and then we'll wait for the printers to come back. Your first witness can get himself comfortable and set up. Mr. Jivraj, if it's okay, if you can sit for when Mr. Banner's maybe ask. I know you may be presenting rather than Mr. Banner asking any question, but there to start with, and then once we move into cross-examination, if you can just shift onto that seat, so it's easiest for Mr. Green to ask any questions that he may have as well. Thank you. I'll accept it, Mr. Banner, as inquiry document 8. If a copy can be sent through to the case officer, and that really goes for any document that I accept. If they can be sent through to my case officer at the inspectorate, and then at least we've got a copy, and then the council can obviously upload it separately as necessary. As far as I'm aware, we do have everything so far. When you're ready, Mr. Jivraj.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So there are 3 relevant documents. You'll see there's the need statement of case, and then a proof and a rebuttal from Mr. Jivraj. Probably the best document for the introduction is the rebuttal. And you tell us in the rebuttal, Mr. Jivraj, Jivraj, you're trustee of the Ismaili Trust, director of Farnham Cemetery Limited, and the president of the Ismaili Council for the United Kingdom. That's a voluntary role, you tell us, in which you're responsible for the social welfare of the Ismaili Muslims. You tell us a bit about your community, which you're going to elaborate on in a moment. Separately from the trust, you're dare I say, a distinguished businessman in your own right. You're CEO of the Queensway Group, a family business founded in 1973, which has a wide portfolio of hotels, coffee houses, restaurants, residential property, and a private members club, the Sloane Club in London. You have also served as chairman of Focus Humanitarian Assistance Europe Foundation, an affiliate of the Aga Khan Development Network, and you're going to talk about the development network shortly. So first of all, is all information set out in the need statement of case, in your main proof and your rebuttal proof correct?
Yes, it is.
Thank you. So to start off with, so as I've indicated, to provide some context to then the questions I'll ask, Mr. Jivraj, you've prepared overnight this text, and I'm going to invite you to read it out.
Thank you. So the purpose of this is really to help everybody situate the Ismaili Muslims and who we are. The Ismailis belong to a Shia branch of Islam. His Highness Prince Karim Aga Khan IV is our spiritual leader, who guides approximately 15 million Ismailis worldwide. As the 49th hereditary Imam in direct lineal descent from Prophet Muhammad, may peace be upon him, His Highness provides both spiritual and worldly guidance in response to the times in which we live. As Mr. Ban has said, I serve as a president of the Ismaili community for the UK. This is a voluntary position and it's an appointment by His Highness the Aga Khan. Our community is rooted in an important principle, which I want to highlight: the inextricable link in Islam between faith and the world, that promotes us to interweave our material and spiritual lives, because faith is not personal spirituality only. Instead, faith is a guiding force that shapes our relations and informs our ethical actions. In the words of His Highness the Aga Khan, and I quote, "The two are so deeply intertwined that one cannot imagine their separation. They constitute a way of life," unquote. These values embody the work of the Aga Khan Development Network, the AKDN, founded and guided by His Highness the Aga Khan. The AKDN has an annual expenditure for its non-profit development activities of approximately $1 billion. It operates in over 30 countries to alleviate poverty and provide health, education, and other vital services in the most vulnerable societies, irrespective of religion, race, or gender. It expresses faith in action of Muslim beliefs and reflects Islam's principles of unity, respect for difference and human dignity, and collective action for the common good. Similarly, as the Ismaili community in the UK and Europe, to support our members, we volunteer our time and give material resources to improve quality of life through family and youth mentorship programs, financial literacy training, support on mental and physical conditions, settlement and integration support for newly arrived migrants, youth camps, and classes to nurture faith, belonging, and identity. We serve the broader communities through our program, Ismaili Civic. And for example, we collaborate with the King's Trust, providing mentors and work experience to young people, Glassdoor Homeless Charity, and other local charities and faith communities where our volunteers support environmental stewardship, poverty alleviation, and community health initiatives. The history of the Ismaili community in the UK. The UK community predominantly comes originally from India. Our forefathers migrated to Africa, particularly East Africa, as economic migrants, as well as railroad builders when the British sent us to Africa. We settled and established ourselves in countries like Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania. And after the political shifts in Africa, we migrated to the UK. Historically, we remain a close community in India and in Africa, and you can imagine the villages and in small areas in which we lived. That tightness of community was easy. We maintained our practices and rootedness in our faith, access to our Jamaat Khana. A Jamaat Khana is what you know as mosques, but they are more than spaces of prayer. The access to Jamaat Khana was easy. We mainly worked, married, and socialized with each other. We upheld cohesion, a sense of belonging, and a spirit of community and brotherhood through this closeness. Belonging was easy because regular attendance in our Jamaat Khanas and our economic and social interests. After migrating to the UK, we remained a close-knit community and became well settled. However, as the third and fourth generation in the UK, the dynamics have changed. The generations born in this country are extremely well educated and integrated into their wider communities. Unlike previous generations, in the Venn diagram of their life, their sense of being an Ismaili attending Jamaat Khana is one slither in a large Venn diagram of their life's touchpoints, activities, and interests. Unlike previous generations who regularly attended Jamaat Khana community events and kept close relationships, and who were mostly business families who could take time to keep up their community activities and connections, this third and fourth generation live in a Western context with broader relationships than previous generations. So what's the picture today? Today, the world is different. On the first day, we heard Farhana at the end said that unless you make the process as easy as possible, she is unable to engage. Young people are mainly professionals who have to perform to succeed. These youth are time poor. They live in a meritocratic and competitive world. Secondly, 50% of our marriages are now outside the faith. And so we are now working with multi-faith families where interests and connections take up people's attention and time. Our Imam's guidance is to be anticipatory and to plan in generational terms, not just 1 and 2, but 5 or more. And we need to adapt. Today, attendance at places of worship has declined not just within our community, but across all faiths. How can we enable future generations to engage? Engagement is not just about Jamaat Khana attendance anymore. Going back to the Islamic values of living the world as well as the faith, it is through living our faith. How do we live our faith? Arts and culture, personal prayers, making a difference through voluntary work. From a community perspective, people attend critical religious celebrations and rites of passages like births, weddings, and funerals. This trend means we must take steps and measures to accommodate these changing behaviors and attitudes. The world is shifting, and we need to move with it. A man without belonging is like a ship without a rudder. So what are we doing? We have youth camps rooted in faith and social activities. We have national sports events. We've appointed a member for arts and culture in my council to drive community expression and involvement through different mediums. Since 2019, we've established Ismaili Civic to serve the broader community in which we live. King's Trust, local soup kitchens, homeless shelters. We participate in drives to collect food, clothes, books, cleanup drives in local communities, etc. Previously, our Jamaat Khanas were designed to allocate 60 to 70% of spaces for prayer and the rest for toilets, cloakrooms, and some element of social activity. Today, we are redesigning our Jamaat Khanas such that 70% of that space is allocated to social spaces and 30% to prayers. This is a massive shift. Making space for early childhood development where young parents can come and meet, people to socialize and work, elderly to have activities where we can teach them digital skills, have conferences, talks, recitals, and presentations. Farnham is one part of this drive to unite our community, to have this sense of belonging and identity. Paying our last respect at a rite of passage, a funeral, is an essential aspect of the practice of our faith. An important touch point, something people hold dear and want to attend. This then creates this sense of belonging. The profile of the funeral attendees could be people like Farhana, and therefore we need to be anticipatory as leaders of this community and think in generational terms. I hope this helps to set the context of what we're trying to do here today.
Thank you, Mr. Chief Raj.
Thank you very much indeed. And before we delve into some of the detail, On sort of high level, how does what you've said now and the considerations you've just outlined inform your response to the approach of the council, the approach of Mr. Collette yesterday, that what we're proposing here is not essential? You could carry on with the current arrangements, disaggregated, some things happening in Brookwood, in Woking, some things happening at different locations in London. You could carry on, that's not essential. How do those considerations you've outlined inform your response to that?
We can do anything. What is needed and what is right for, as I've just explained, the generation today and for the future. It is not practically convenient from a time perspective as well as environmental perspective for our volunteers and mourners to do what we are currently doing. This is, if I can take you through the entire process of what happens today, that might be helpful.
Should we start with the Gusal?
Yeah.
Do you want to
So,
just explain?
so let me start even earlier than that, which is when somebody dies. A person will die probably in a hospital or a nursing home or at home. In all three cases, the body will be in a mortuary, which is third party. And until a death certificate is issued, there's nothing that can be done. The moment a death certificate is issued, as Imran Bhatia the other day explained when his mother passed away a couple of weeks ago, the community volunteer system takes over. The funeral team will make all necessary arrangements for where the ghusl can take place. It's a third-party venue, and so it needs to be timed in a way where the venue is available. So from the mortuary in the very early hours of the morning, middle of the night, a ghusl ceremony takes place in a third-party, probably substandard facility or basic facility, where there's effectively a metal table and a bucket and water. That's where that happens. Why does it happen in the middle of the night? Is, as Nafisa Herji explained, as chairperson of the Ghusl committee, is because the women or the men, depending on the sex of the deceased person, needs to get back to their homes to shower, do the needful for children to go to school. They then go to the hall where the funeral takes place at approximately 10:30 in the morning. There they are responsible for part of the funeral ceremony. So now you move from ghusl to the funeral ceremony, which happens in a hall, which is attached to the Jamaat Khana. It's not in the prayer hall. That is not part of the faith, but it's in the social area of the Jamaat Khana. The hearse brings the body to the coffin to that hall. The family gets an amount of time to spend privately with the deceased, and then the general congregation comes in and a ceremony takes place. That probably lasts 40 minutes, maximum an hour, after which the male members of the congregation will set out to Brookwood in minibuses or coaches or their cars. And they will arrive at Brookwood, where prayers are recited. The body is carried to graveside, buried. Throughout all of this, there are specific religious ceremonies that take place. And once that all those ceremonies are finished, the congregation who've left their spouses or female children at the hall back in London will head back there to collect the family. So that's the funeral ceremony. In the evening, during Jamaat Khana time, prayer time in the evening, it's 7 o'clock. There is the final prayer ceremony that takes place for the deceased. That is the process, Mr. Banner.
Thank you. And it was suggested a couple of days ago in questions of some of the people who turned up in support of the proposal that if the pavilion was built, some people involved in the Gusal process might prefer to have a choice. They might choose to carry on in the current arrangements instead of coming down to Farnham and using the consolidated building. How likely do you think that is? And perhaps in answering that question, is there anything further you'd like to say about the advantages of the consolidated approach that's proposed?
So it's particularly to do with the Ghusl ceremony. Instead of the Ghusl volunteers having to do this at a very early hours of the morning or middle of the night, this ceremony can happen in the early day, meaning 6, 7 o'clock in the morning. It's a 1-hour process, and prepare the body and leave it in the family room in readiness for the family to attend. As I mentioned earlier, the same Ghusl team that do the cleaning also are involved in the funeral ceremony in the hall. And so there are shower facilities that we've built into our proposed building at Farnham. And so they have the ability to change and get ready and be prepared and stay on facility to carry out and see through that funeral ceremony.
Thank you. I'd now like to ask about the burial process and the situation in relation to women, which has been discussed during the inquiry. And one of the issues that was discussed 2 days ago was in the current arrangements, would it be, instead of a building, would it be possible for women to watch from afar? And if so, how far? And did it make a difference that the proposed building had a screen, etc.? Can you enlighten the inspector on that issue, and perhaps also let the inspector know to what extent have the proposed arrangements had the approval of His Highness the Aga Khan?
Yeah, these are matters that clearly require explaining because they are not straightforward. We we think 15 million Ismailis across the world are the most minority tradition within the Muslim Ummah. There are 1.9 billion Muslims. We think 15 million across the world. The majority of those 15 million live in countries like Syria, Tajikistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, effectively the East, where predominantly the Muslims are Sunni Muslims. And so when we do what we do here as westernized modern Ismaili Muslims, we do need to take into full account how things here can be interpreted in those parts of the world that could be detrimental to our communities, minority communities in those parts of the world. So Muslim culture suggests that women do not attend a gravesite. And as a minority Muslim community, it doesn't make any sense for us to move away from that and create unnecessary problems or risks for members of our community that are living in those parts of the world. When this project of this Farnham cemetery came up, which was in back end of 2019, I was appointed president in July 2019. I think my first knowledge of this property came to me at the back end of 2019. It took a long time to understand and negotiate that deal. And just before I did, I submitted a paper to His Highness the Aga Khan seeking consent for this to happen in the way that we envisaged it. And so this issue of women participation is clearly an issue for the generation that I've just described to you in my opening remarks. People who are educated here, live here, married to non-Ismailis, and who want to be part of the burial process. And so this is a good solution that provides closure for those members of the community that can't attend a graveside. It's not just women, they're elderly people, infirm people. And this concept of being able to witness this ceremony through by sitting in that pavilion works exceptionally well.
And you said you submitted the paper to the Aga Khan, His Highness the Aga Khan, for approval. Was that approval forthcoming?
Yes.
Thank you. Next, want to just touch upon architecture. And is there anything you'd like to say about the importance of architecture and how that's influenced these proposals? Well, to the Muslim community at large, but specifically to Ismaili Muslims.
So these local activities that take place in countries where Ismailis live, so I'm talking specifically now about the UK, predominantly those activities are funded by the local community. In one of the objectors' papers, there was talk about utilizing religious offerings for this purpose. I mean, first of all, I was pretty disappointed with such a, when they don't understand what we're doing, and to put these kind of things on paper was pretty disgusting, frankly. But anyway, let me explain. These local activities and events are funded by people like me and Farine, who's here, and other members of the community, including young professionals, be that £5 a month or 20,000 a month. And you heard from Mr. Naguib Keraj, who is a donor to this particular, it's locally funded. And it's very easy for us to just put 4 walls and a tin roof and call it a pavilion, because it would be pretty economically cheap to do. But that is not the ethic of our faith. The ethic of our faith is to provide an environment that allows for improvement of quality of life. Now, quality of life means a lot, okay? It's very deep, could mean anything to anybody. But it's this whole experience. And so when you look and go to the Aga Khan Development Network website, you will find huge amounts of development and buildings and infrastructure and parks that are built in order to improve the quality of life. One such example is the Al-Azhar Park in Cairo, which was a rubbish dump. We have no Ismailis in Cairo, but His Highness the Aga Khan decided that he's going to take this rubbish dump and create it into the Al-Azhar Park. I don't have it off the top of my head, but it's a vast space. And it was rejuvenated and a park was created and economic activity started. People have greenery in Cairo where it didn't exist. And this is just an example of how we look at the built environment. I was responsible, a part of a steering committee that built the King's Cross Aga Khan Center at King's Cross, which is a building that houses the Aga Khan Foundation, the Aga Khan University, and the Institute of Ismaili Studies. Adjacent to that campus is a student accommodation that operates under the name of Victoria Hall. I am a real estate developer. I build hotels. I'm in the business. I have not seen a student accommodation in London that has that kind of quality or caliber. The standard commercial student accommodation will have 14 square meter bedrooms. We have bedrooms that near 20 square meters. We have a roof on a garden, a roof garden. We have a foyer with fountains. And these are students who are coming to the university and who are not paying for their accommodation. So it's not like we're recouping the money by jacking up the rates. This is all to do with what experience you can give a human being in doing what they need to do in the best environment possible. So with that value and ethic in mind, when we acquired Farnham, we went out to 12 leading global architects to pitch for this job. And the pitch was very simple. I quote it somewhere in my papers, but the essence of it is that the instruction or the brief was, please create a building here that will provide a space for a funeral, the spiritual space, but also ensuring that it absolutely fits within the area that we are building it in. And that is priority. So we didn't come in with minarets and domes. We came in with a barn. And frankly, that was the architect's interpretation of what this area needed. And we are mere lay people. We engaged the best, and the best came up with a solution that they felt was appropriate for this area. And that's why architecture is important.
Then the issue of numbers and capacity has been the subject of discussion. Can you explain how judgments were reached as to the capacity of the building? I've got a very particular question about the 365 number in Mr. Green's opening, but we'll come to that in due course. But firstly, how were judgments reached? What sort of process was involved? Who was involved? What things were taken into account?
There is no particular science to these sorts of things. I mean, we are opening new Jamaat Khanas, you know, I wouldn't say all the time, but probably a couple in a term of office. So a term of office is 3 years. We will probably open 2 or 3 Jamaat Khanas that are required. I'm currently looking at sent papers up the line for a Jamaat Khana in Rotterdam and another one in Stockholm. And we've just acquired a site for one in Manchester. How do we arrive at what is the appropriateness of the thing? It's effectively the knowledge of the local community leaders that have the knowledge and have been doing this for years. So we have, as I said, a funeral committee, and we have senior leadership that sort of revolves around everything to do with funerals. And so once we engaged Neil McLaughlin as the appointed architect. Neil and the project team, our design team, spent multiple hours of workshop with our funeral people to understand what the building needed or was needed in that building and how many people we needed to accommodate. And this is, as I said, not a science, it's a judgment. And we needed to arrive at a capacity that was neither too little or too big. And we feel completely comfortable that where we've landed is the right number. Now, there might be one or two funerals that will be well above the number because of the prominence of an individual. But you know what? We as a community have been operating these kind of, as I said, sports events, social events, activities where we're able to manage in advance how people come and go.
Do you have a sense, I mean, say, for example, if Elton John died today, people have a sense that wherever he's going to be buried, of that there'll be quite a lot of people turning up and plans could be made. Do you have a sense that, perhaps experience may help in this regard, of if somebody was likely to have a large attendance at a funeral, you know that in advance from who they were and their profile?
Absolutely. I mean, you know, we have 39 Jamaat Khanas across the UK. We are talking only about Greater London, where we have 8. All of these Jamaat Khanas have leaders within them. Those leaders know pretty much every member of the community, and they will have a clear sense of participation. And we have structures and systems whereby we can manage such a situation. I mean, we had it in COVID, where you had 2-meter distancing. We had Jamaat Khanas that were open, places of worship were allowed to be open during COVID, and capacity of, 1,000 people hall that we have at the Ismaili Centre in South Kensington was limited down to, just a couple of hundred. That was managed through a registration program. And similar things can happen for those very unusual funerals. We were asked to provide, in our consultation with the planning case officers, data in regard to car parking at Brookwood. And so we instigated a counting mechanism for a year, which we submitted, and we can see from that the average is 40 cars. The smell test or the sense check was, if you take 41 person in a car and then we have minibuses and you multiply by that by even 2 or 3 times, we are sort of within the 150, 180 capacity for this hall.
Some funerals can be well above the number. Just to be clear, what number do you have in mind?
The capacity 180.
Yes, thank you. And in that respect, if Mr. Green's opening says the combined capacity of all the rooms would be approximately 365 people, and he cites for that page 38 of the design access statement. Now, don't think you need, but I'd like to show the inspector that just to ask you a question, which I don't think you will need the statement for. So it's CD 1.12.
Sorry, Mr. Banner, what page number was it?
38.
Thank you.
And there's a drawing there. No, sorry, just to Mr. Chief Judge. So, and the 365 number is not actually a number that we've stated anywhere, but it appears where the council's got that from is by adding up 2 times 150 for 2 different rooms and then the rest, essentially. For your typical funeral, would you expect, how would you expect the arrangements in those rooms to work? Is the idea that there'll be people in both rooms at the same time, or that people will progress through the rooms? Just explain to us how the flow through those rooms is intended to operate.
Well, I imagine people would walk in through the covered entrance, turn left, go into that shoe and cloak area, and then walk into the main hall. And when the funeral is finished, the appropriate members of the community will go out onto the graveyard, come back in. But it's the same number of people. I mean, if there are 50 people in a funeral, it's the same 50 people who are using different rooms.
You say the shoe area, in a mosque, people take their shoes off. Is that the same in this building? So they'd have to go through it. They have to go to a room to take their shoes off before going to the next.
Yes, so as you look at the plan, that left-hand side of the covered entrance in that area is, I believe, designed for shoe racks and cloaks. Yes.
And what would you say, leaving aside the outriders, the sort of the Elton John paradigm kind of funeral dimension, what is your judgment would be the typical funeral size, the ordinary, leaving aside the occasional outriders?
My funeral team tell me it's in the region of 80 to 100.
Then lastly, it's been said in some of the correspondence, a little bit less at this inquiry, to be fair, that this is a facility for people from London. There's no real local connection. So we heard from one lady who's actually spent 60 odd years in Farnham. But do you have to hand any numbers as to how many Ismaili Muslims there are in Surrey, just by way of a sort of flavour?
I believe it's about 1,300.
Thank you. Mr. Jivraj, is there anything else you'd like to say? I think I've asked all the questions that I'd like to ask, but this is your opportunity to add anything.
I don't think there's anything further I need to add. I mean, it's my papers that I've submitted explain the reasoning for the need, so may not be.
Thank you, Mr. Jivraj. Thank you, Mr. Bama. Now might be the time if you can just sift over and get yourself comfortable, Mr. Jivraj, and then let us know when you're ready. Mr. Green, will you be ready for cross-examination?
Yes.
Jivraj, yes? Yeah. Mr. Green?
Thank you, sir. Good morning, Mr. Jivraj. If I can start with the history of Brookwood Cemetery. I'm not going to ask you about the entire history of Brookwood Cemetery, but that has traditionally been the place of burial for Ismailis certainly in the southeast, as I understand it, for decades. Is that right?
Yes.
And there's reference in the evidence to the space set aside for Ismailis running out, and I think the local authority had plans to expand Brookwood Cemetery, or the space available.
Sorry, I don't understand. The local authority had plans to extend? I don't understand the question.
I understand from your evidence that the reason why Farnham was bought was because space at Brookwood Cemetery was running out. And so it was an immediate need, or a near immediate need, to provide more burial space. And I think I've read somewhere that the space was going to run out in 2023, last year. But there have been no burials taking place at Farnham, have there? So what's happened in the interim?
We found more space in Brookwood. We've removed some of the hedges and we've created burial spaces because this hasn't happened.
So how much more space were you able to create?
50.
And have you explored the option of acquiring more land at Brookwood?
Yes, we have.
And your conclusion?
Brookwood was able to offer us a plot of land. You might need to say, a plot of land which was away from our cemetery, which doesn't matter, but was only for 500 burial plots. And 500 burial plots at our rate of requirement would probably last us between 4 and 6 years. And we'd be back in the same position again. In addition to that, the economics were unacceptable to the trustees.
Thank you. Now, the principal driver, the reason for the acquisition of Farnham, was to provide a greater amount of burial space. And as I understand it, the selection of architects and so on, and the design brief and so on, that followed the acquisition of the land.
Yes.
And you were part of that process?
The acquisition or the selection? Yes.
Do you were shown earlier part of the design and access statement. I just want to take you to one or two plans, and we can look at the design and access statement, or any other document which has the plans. What I want to make sure is that we're all looking at the same document. So
If you give me the ID, whatever number, I think I have.
Access statement is CD 1.12.
Sorry, you want CD what?
CD 1.12 is the design and access statement. It's the document you were shown a few moments ago. And if you look at page 8,
Yes.
you can see the plan, and that shows outlined in blue the entirety of the land holding that was acquired, and outlined in red the appeal site itself. And what I want to know is whether the appeal site, the location of the building, whether that was something that you and the other trustees told the architect, that's where we want the building to go within the red line, or was there some other process that led to the identification of the appeal site as the place where the building was going to go, rather than, say, zone 2, one of the blue zones?
It was the trustees and the community's decision to go for zone 1, with a caveat to the winning architect to challenge us if he thought differently.
Okay, so I take it then that the red line, broadly speaking, was selected by the trustees rather than the architect.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. And the brief for the building, broadly speaking, this is meant to be a symbolic building, is it not?
Yes.
Yes. And it's a building that would, as I understand it, be expected to have a certain presence.
Not necessarily.
Well, you said a few moments ago, in theory, you could have asked for, commissioned a building, 4 walls and a tin roof, I think you said. So something that was entirely functional, that had no symbolism attached to it. But that's not what has actually been commissioned, is it?
No, but there's in my understanding, a 4 walls and a tin wouldn't be symbolic. But you could have another design that's symbolic, but that's not my job. We hired the best architect to come up with a building that fit in that environment, that met our spiritual, religious needs.
I appreciate that. And one can see that a building can perform a number of functions. There is, if you like, the purely practical functions. So how much space do you need? What facilities do you have? And so on. And then there are the less easily identified, perhaps, or tangible functions that a building like this would be expected to have. And one is, I mean, I spoke of presence or symbolism. It may be said that it should create a statement about its purpose, its intent, the culture it's intended to serve. Is that fair?
I think that that is fair, yeah.
I mean, obviously we'll hear from the architect as to his inspiration and so on, but it's fair to say, isn't it, that, for example, the form of the roof, this tall structure, that is intended to have a symbolic effect, as well as simply providing cover for the people below?
It's really a question
That's for the
I
architect.
think these are
Why
so-
he chose a roof that is pointed and steep, I don't know. But
Okay. Am I right in thinking then that there was no particular cultural or religious reason why the roof is the shape it is?
as I said, we didn't build a dome.
No.
We built a barn. It's completely non-religious. It was there to fit the local vernacular. So the roof is nothing to do with the religion.
Okay, thank you very much. And so far as the location of the building within the site is concerned, again, was that driven by the trustees or by the architect?
I don't think I can be specific about this because, you know, as I said, we hire professionals to tell us what is the right thing to do. Instinctively, we felt this was the right location. There's a water feature there as you approach the building. It felt like it was the lowest point of the land. So instinctively, that was a good place, as opposed to the top corner where that pylon was at the end, which would mean mourners may have to walk for half a day to get there, didn't feel appropriate.
No, well, one would want to avoid the pylon, I think, for all sorts of reasons. Thank you. You've still got the design and access statement in front of you. Can you go to page 14? That shows the internal layout of the proposed building. And one can see that the area devoted to the Guzel ceremony, the preparation of the body, takes up a relatively small amount of the building, doesn't it?
Yes.
And in your rebuttal, you dismiss the idea of providing a dedicated Guzel facility in another place. If we can take your rebuttal up, just to remind you of what you say there. Your page 5, paragraph 2.20. You say, over the years, we've considered the option of establishing a standalone Ismaili dedicated Guzel facility alongside our existing arrangements. However, given the relatively small number of funerals annually, such a facility and investment would be impractical, financially unviable and unsustainable. That's what you say there. But if you look at the space required and the facilities required, and they're not elaborate, a relatively modest building anywhere could provide those facilities, couldn't it?
I've sort of said here financially unviable. Here we've bought land, the land is free. It's part of a bigger development that's going to happen, and there are 2 small rooms within that development. From a trustee perspective, financially, this makes complete sense than to go to a London location to acquire a building, however small, costs money, and fitting it out in an area that works for our volunteers. So it's not, there is a holistic decision that has been made for 70, 80, 90 ghusl ceremonies a year. It's not financially viable.
Well, if we can just explore that a little more, you say over the years this has been the position. So certainly the option of a standalone ghusl facility has been in your minds. Is that fair?
Yes.
The space required is really very small, isn't it?
Sorry, no.
Well, we have the diagram here that tells us how much space is required. It's a small fraction of what's proposed, is it not?
It's a small fraction because of all the other area that is there. If this was a standalone facility, it would require significantly more area than just those 2 rooms. You would require foyer areas, entrance areas, additional circulation areas that add cost. And the other thing, just so we are clear about this, the Ismaili community in Toronto have just done a standalone ghusl facility. And so, yes, it has been on our mind and it happens. The issue is their scale is significantly different to ours, and therefore the cost of a funeral amortized by the number of funeral ghusls that are carried out is part of the equation. What I think you're trying to say, if I may, is this small space, why can't you put it elsewhere? I'm saying to you that as a real estate person, in London to acquire the appropriate space, not just 2 rooms, but the ancillary space that would go with the ghusl rooms, divided by 80 ghusls a year, is not practical. And that needs to be funded, and it's funded through donors.
The proposal at the moment is going to cost many, many times what providing a standalone ghusl facility would cost, isn't it?
Yes.
It's said that there are concerns about, in particular, female volunteers going to the existing facilities that are used. I think the figure of 5 or 6 was mentioned in the southeast or in London, wherever they are. But if that was a serious concern, a standalone, a dedicated facility could have been provided years ago, couldn't it?
It could have done at the right cost. And yeah.
And that would have been a small fraction of the cost of this proposal.
Taken independently, yes, but this is part of an aggregated solution.
If I can go on to possibly the final issue then, the segregation of men and women. You've explained very helpfully why Ismailis in this country still observe, if you like, that requirement that women should not attend the burial itself. And as I understand, it's not because it's prohibited as such, it's because of concern that if it was allowed to happen here, there would be repercussions elsewhere.
No, I'm sorry if I misled you. It's not a matter of we are not taking a prohibitive view on this. The issue that we have is, what is that line? Is it 5 meters from the grave? Is it 25 meters from the grave? Is it 100 meters from the grave? What is the appropriate level? We don't know that appropriate level. It's not written anywhere. This is a judgment call. And when you have a situation where you say, stand 20 meters away, you get creep. And that is a risk that we as a community cannot take. This clearly, women are not at graveside. They're in a building, and it deals with all of our potential issues. So prohibited, not prohibit, I'm not a theologian, but this works for us.
Well, I understand that this solution is said to work for you, but I'm still trying to understand why other solutions might not also be possible. Because if it's a requirement that there be a distance, a significant distance, or at least a tangible distance between the women and the burial place itself, that's something that could very easily be established and identified by some marker or some feature on the ground and say, here, but no closer. And you say creep, but so long as the position is clear, why should there be creep?
I can't answer that question. There are multiple interpretations of any faith. You have it in Christianity, there is in Judaism, and there is in Islam. So I don't want to engage in this conversation. We have an interpretation of our faith, which is to us, and we will keep it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Green. Thank you, Mr. Jivraj. Are there any interested parties with questions before I have a couple of my own? Councillor Pavel, is it?
Thank you, sir. I do have a couple of questions, if that's okay. Thank you very much, sir, for your detailed explanation. I'm sorry, I'm here. And it's very reassuring to hear that you are planning for not just 1 or 2 generations, but for 4 or 5, and that you want to create the best possible environment for people. I found your statements regarding the university provision you had provided truly laudable. Do you accept that as an elected representative, I have a duty to look at plans not just for the residents of today, but also for the residents of the future?
Yes,
Thank you, sir. And do you also accept that I have a duty, as you say, to improve the quality of the life of those I represent?
yes.
Thank you, sir. So when you bought the site in 2019, at what point did you reach out to elected representatives to discuss the potential needs of the community that live in this area, as well as the needs of your own?
We didn't. The land had excellent planning consent for cemetery use. We took advice from 3 planning consultants as to the possibility of putting a building on a land that has planning for burial. And all 3 advised us that we could build a building as ancillary to the funeral. I didn't think that that required your consent or engagement at that stage. Once we had started to develop our plans, we did reach out to neighbors and the case officers, and for multiple years engaged with 4 different planning case officers because they kept changing. And we felt we had extended our arm to the local community through our planning consultancy process. The councillors chose not to attend and not to engage with us.
So just to be very clear, the engagement with councillors was after you'd given a brief to your architect, after the plans had been submitted to this council, and did not undertake any conversation with local residents as to what might, in your words, improve the quality of their lives.
Correct. That wasn't, we felt was more for the design team to do as part of that planning process.
So just coming to the layout of the building, in terms of the layout of the building, I noticed that all of the toilets are not designated to a particular sex. Obviously in buildings that are built for social facilities in this day and age, and in fact there is a listed building being converted locally where Waverley Borough Council have insisted that there are ladies' toilets, men's toilets and a disabled toilet. Just from a cultural perspective, can you help me to understand the use of a multi-sex toilet and whether that's acceptable?
It is acceptable because it's come from the grassroots of the community that have engaged in this design.
Thank you, sir. So just one further question. If you had engaged with the local community and councillors prior to submitting the plans, we would obviously have asked for the walking and cycling route through the site that is so desperately needed by the local community. And even when the plans were submitted, and this was requested not just by local people, but by local councillors and indeed the Highway Authority, there was still a resistance to providing that route, saying it was neither desirable or feasible. Is that a view you share?
So I think there's that.
I don't share that.
Almost
Sorry.
pretty much a speech rather than a question. It's not, the councillor's already given her evidence, and if points are being put in that weren't actually spoken about, then I've been deprived of the opportunity to cross-examine the councillor.
I think there was enough of a question. I think I could reframe the question just to ask to remove the statement. I think that's quite right, and I think when asking questions, try and keep it just to the question rather than putting across reaffirming previous statements that have been made. The decision, Mr. Givraj, to not include a walking and cycling route through the site as part of the planning application. Thank you.
Councillor Powell, Councillor Powell. I've spent an amount of time explaining who we are, that we believe in engagement with civil society and will do our best to work with the neighbours. I will take 2 points up, not just the path, but the church car parking that has also been misrepresented. We have no issue with either, but my planning people will explain that when they come on the thing, on the witness box. We have engaged with the church from the moment we acquired this land to provide them car park. Extensive discussions have happened with the church. They wanted us to gift them the land. We are a charity. We are unable to gift that land because of charity law. We came up with a construct with the church to provide them with land that they can use in perpetuity. And that was in the previous planning application. The rejection of the planning that was recommended by the case officer, the members decided that they will reject this planning application due to openness. Our advice from our planning team was that on that basis then, we need to remove the car park, which is what we've done. Subsequent to that, I have had, and my team have had, multiple engagements with the church, and we continue to engage with them and will continue to engage with them to hopefully provide them with car park space. We are not reneging from that at all, to set the record straight. The issue on pathways is something technical to do with the fact that it is ultra vires to the planning application, but you can ask my planning team as to why that is the case. But it's not a something that we have just dismissed out of line here. It's to do with technicalities that you can speak to my planning team on, if that helps.
Thank you, sir. And we will, of course, continue to work with all of our local community, as I always do. One last thing, just in terms of washing facilities, obviously you talked earlier and you talked through a timeline, which was very helpful. And you talked through a timeline that started in the early hours of the morning and then walked through to a final prayer ceremony at 7 o'clock in the evening. And the fact that all of this would be done in various different locations under the current system. Can you just help me with the washing facilities? Because I'm still struggling very slightly with the fact that the layout doesn't seem to necessarily allow for that in a way that certainly when I've been involved in dealing with people who have passed away, I would have wanted to have had facilities that were direct access off the building, and that's obviously not the case in this instance. And I would just like to understand whether your religious leader has also approved the layout and whether he thinks that that's appropriate in terms of the design.
The funeral committee that include the Ghusl team have been thoroughly engaged with our architects in this design, yes.
Are there any other questions from interested parties before I ask my own? No? Okay. I only have a couple of points, questions and clarification, just to assist my understanding that haven't been otherwise covered through cross-examination or questions that from interested parties. In your proof at I think it's paragraph 212, it doesn't really matter too much because I'll give the explanation where before the question. It identifies that funerals would typically occur on a Tuesday, a Thursday, and or a Saturday, and typically between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. So just to assist my understanding of the Ismaili funeral and burial requirements and the associated processes expected, I'm just thinking about a particular scenario of when a death may occur. So, for example, when a death occurs on a Sunday, because I understand you helpfully talk through the process, and there's the mortuary process that are waiting for the death certificate, but my understanding is, as a practice, the funeral is generally expedited faster than maybe some other religious cultures' funerals may be. So for example, I'm thinking of a Sunday. In those circumstances, I'm assuming the body will be stored in a separate mortuary, but then will be transferred on the next available funeral day, or would there be a need to, for example, have a funeral on a Monday, or would a Tuesday be absolutely fine?
The next date would be fine. So it's either Tuesday, Thursday, or Saturday. So
Thank you. And just for my understanding, there was talk about the Brookwood Cemetery, and it was helpfully drawn out in terms of what the potential capacity and the scenarios are for the continuation at Brookwood Cemetery, and how long left in terms of capacity there may be with the plots that you've got available. Just for certainty for me, and it may be in the evidence that you can point me to it, or that the parties can't otherwise point me to. But I just wonder what the estimated capacity overall is at Farnham, for my understanding there.
I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to that question. I think it's sort of more than 2,000. I'm not mistaken, but hopefully the architect can address that one.
Thank you. As a ballpark figure, that's helpful. It was just to place it in context, because I haven't visited Brookwood Cemetery, so I didn't have an understanding of the difference in the comparative scale of what you had available compared to what could be available to you in Farnham.
Just to clarify that particular point, and we also have the adjacent land that is cemetery use as well.
Yeah.
So,
I think that's what I was meaning in terms of.
I mean, in total, I think you're
overall
sort of talking about near sort of 6, 7, 8,000.
6, 7, 8,000.
Yeah, I can't
Yes,
be precise, but it's that sort of.
Yes, no. I should have framed my question a bit more clearly. I was talking about the whole within your control, rather than just the appeal site itself. Just sort of a feel of what longevity there might be in terms of funerals that may take place in that particular location. Thank you.
So just on that, the design and access statement refers in one place to a 50-year period. Paragraph 2.3.
Thank you. Just checking through that everything else I had that was covered. Just one final question, and it's just into the procedure, and just in terms of the need for the deceased to be transported for burial. Is there a need for an associated cortege with the related requirements, or is it fine for Goosal to take place and then any cortege to follow?
No, there's no cortege structural system. Even today, when the body leaves the hall to go to the cemetery, there is no cortege. People just make their own way, and in fact arrive at the Brookwood before the hearse arrives.
Thank you. That was my understanding from the evidence, but I just thought it was helpful.
Thank you.
Helpful to clarify that. I have no further questions, so I thank you very much for your time, Mr. Jivraj.
Just a couple of questions of
Oh, sorry.
Do you want to shift around the circle? Just a couple.
It's time for re-examination. Apologies.
Just while Mr. Jivraj is getting ready, so Councillor Coburn asked various points about consultation. Can I just draw your attention to Mr. McLaughlin's proof And there's a section there that lists the consultation, including with the church and the town council, before the application was submitted. I simply draw your attention to that because it's probably Mr. Jivraj may not have been involved in all the consultation because he had a professional team to do that. So the points put to here were inaccurate. Mr. Jivraj, just by way of re-examination, a couple of points. Mr. Green took you to that plan in the design and access system, which I don't think we need to get up again, of the zones. You probably know zone 1 and zone 2. He asked, did you tell the architect where the building should go, zone 1, as opposed to somewhere else like zone 2? And you said it was the trustees and community decision to go to zone 1, with the caveat to the willing architect to challenge us if he thought differently. Why?
We're not experts. We pay for the best and hope they will give us the best answer.
Did Mr. Blocker think differently?
Thankfully not.
Thank you. Then you talked about Toronto and the standalone Gusar facility that's happened there, and you said their scale is significantly different and the cost therefore amortised by a number of Gusars is different. Can you just elaborate what that difference is? Just give a little bit more detail about that, please.
I don't have specific numbers, Mr. Banner, but the greater Toronto population of Ismailis is probably in the region of 40,000, significantly more, and their rate of deaths as a result is also significantly more.
To you that, well, you could, if there really was a serious concern about safety, you could have provided a standalone Gusar in London several years ago, and you said it could have done the right cost. As a sort of, can you just give us a sense of orders of magnitude? I mean, you're a very experienced property developer and portfolio holder in London. I mean, are we talking, if one was to find a facility like that in zone 1 or zone 2, by way of example, will we be measuring it in tens of millions, 5 million, 20 million? What sort of level of cost in orders of magnitude?
Yeah, I don't think it would be in the millions in terms of, it's more about the cost per Gusar that we would be calculating, because you could rent spaces as opposed to buy the building, then you need the planning consent. There are complications, but we look at this from a cost per Gusar perspective.
It was put to you, well, it'll be a small fraction of the appeal scheme. You said, well, the appeal scheme is part of an aggregated solution. Can you just again elaborate on that answer? Why does the aggregated solution achieve better outcome financially, as well as in terms of the overall quality and dignity of the process in the way that you described?
When you're developing a building, then and maybe Mr. McLaughlin is better placed to respond to that, but in my experience, there are preliminary costs that the contractor will charge you for starting and managing the development, which is then amortized over the building. If you remove that small element of 2 rooms, it makes absolutely no difference to the overall cost of what we are proposing here. And so effectively, we are pretty much getting a Gusar facility in here for minimal cost, as opposed to the other way around.
Improved Gusar facilities might have been provided in the past. How confident are you that what is proposed will make a meaningful difference to the dignity and convenience of the preparation process?
From a volunteer perspective? Well, I think as we heard from Nafisa Herji, and as I explained, it's a process that requires people to come out in the middle of the night into a third location, whether it's ours or not ours, it's a third location. They then have to go home. Then they have to come back to a hall. This is clearly a significant improvement in the quality of life of those volunteers.
Then last point, I had a rather sensitive exchange about whether it would be possible for people to stand a certain different distance away. You could have a mark on the ground thus far, and I sensed you had a degree of discomfort answering those questions. I don't want to make you uncomfortable, but is there anything further you'd like to say by way of sort of elaboration on why having us the coherent approach of behind a screen with no scope for interpretation is advantageous to Mr. Green's marker on the ground saying don't go any further?
I think you've answered it in the question. It's easier. It's just there is no discussion to be had about the women don't attend graveside, full stop. That's a statement you can make very clearly by doing what we are doing. You start allowing within the grounds and suddenly it becomes grey. And that in these kinds of moments are discussions and arguments that nobody wants to have, where people whose loved ones have passed away, they are charged, and as a leader of the community, you're having to take certain decisions. This is a situation that we would be advised to keep away from. And this solution allows us to clearly do that.
Mr. Judge, that's all the questions I have, so you're free to leave the round table.
Councillor Coburn.
Excuse me, sir. It's just that when Mr. Banner was re-examining his first question, he mentioned Councillor Coburn in the consultation.
I'm
And
terribly sorry.
No, it was Councillor Powell, I think
I
he
just
meant.
wanted to make sure that's
Absolutely.
Councillor
I
Powell.
do apologise. No, I do apologise. Sorry.
That's no problem at all.
Sorry, I'm not going to admonish too much because there may be an occasion in the inquiry where I may get the wrong name as well, and I want to have a bit of legislation because you've got to understand when we've got a room full of people, sometimes it can be quite hard and you can mix names up. So I hope you appreciate that it was an honest mistake. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Jivraj. That ends the evidence of your first witness, Mr. Banner. Are there any comments or procedural matters to take into account before we move to the second witness? I would like to take a break first, but before we break, is there anything of note that needs to be taken up at this particular point?
What we might do informally the break is provide Mr. Green with Mr. McLaughlin's statement, so you can have a look over it.
Thank you. In that case, it's 11:09. If we say we return at 25 past 11.
That's good to me, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.